it brings back a few memories, this does. It's a long time ago now. This beach is just full of tanks, burnt out tanks, guns, vehicles. It was just chaos, absolute chaos. I sometimes wonder if there's anything under these sands, you know. Sure to be somewhere. I suppose they've been dug up now, but there must be rounds, ammunition and all sorts buried here somewhere. Of all the people on the landings, the first one I met was my own brother, which was, you know, thousands of troops on the beach, and I met him. And I knew his company, 868 Company, Royal Engineers, and in them days, if you was in a field, in tents and that, there was always the unit painted on a sign at the front, like ours would be Westminster Dragoons. So any officer, anybody who was looking for anybody, they know, oh yeah, this is their company. And John's company was 868 Royal Engineers. So we're going by with the tanks to a field a bit farther down, and I spotted it. Oh yeah, that's my brother's company, you know. Anyway, when we pulled into with the tanks off the road, put nets over them and that, to keep them from the air, you know, couldn't see them from the air. And I said to the officer, I said, my brother's just down there, can I, any chance to go and see him, like, you know? He said, well, he said, you can go, Jim. He said, but don't be long, he said, because we don't know what's going to happen. We might be off any minute. Anyway, I walked back. It's only a couple of hundred yards down the road, and the sentry on the gate said, excuse me, I said, it's Sapper Ryan, this company. He said, you mean Ginger? Because he got ginger hair, you know. I said, that's him. He said, in that tent there, trying to make himself a cup of tea. Oh, Jim, he said, Jim, come in, I'm making a cup of tea. And the other, in them days, a round white disc, and you set fire to it, and put your billy can on top to boil your water to make a cup of tea. Well, you'd have been quicker doing it if you'd held a candle under it, you know, because it was still brewing, it took when I come out. And I left him, I said, I'll have to leave you, John, now, I've got to get back. He said, okay. He said, well, we'll have a cup of tea again some other time. I was 18 when I was called up, just at the prime of life. I was knocking about with a young lady, you know, and all this. And then just to get called up and leave home, I've never been away from home in my life before. I think the farthest I've been was Blackpool. The first time I got wind of what we were going to do was in the south of England, and it was what they call a massive camp. No civilians were allowed in, and no troops were allowed out. Well, at night, all you could do was go down the pub or have a laugh and a joke with your mates in the tents, all on the canvas, of course. Anyway, they decided they're going to have a game of housey-housey, which is like bingo. So we're having a game of this bingo one night, and I'm to look at my card. I go, house, oh, gentleman over there's won the house. He said, have you got a hat? I said, oh, I got my berry. He said, well, your berry out. Anyway, took my hat off, my berry off, and he filled it with bloody notes. We were all French francs. He said, yeah, Jim, he said, you won that. I thought, aye, I'm set up for life here. Well, everything about the French was money was notes. Even the sixpence was a 5 franc or whatever it was. When I counted up, it was worth about 20 quid this pound. I thought I was set up for life. And then I thought, aye, French francs, we're going to France. Well, you have 6 weeks of basic training over obstacle course and things like that. Then you go to what they call the assessment, they asked you what you was doing in civilian life. Well, being as I was in the fairground business, I was a lorry driver, heavy lorry driver. So he said, lorry driver was you? I said, yes. I said, all right. Let's get on that vehicle there and let's see how you perform with it, the sergeant says. Well, he gets some clowns, you know, so they can drive like, and couldn't ride a bike, half of them. He got one fella, he said, take that lorry down there, and he reverses straight into the barracks. Bang! Get him out, he said, he's bloody useless. Then, of course, you know, you can tell straight away, like, as soon as I got on and I was away, you're all right, yeah, you go over there. We'll put you in the heavy division, what they call the heavy division. They're only little lorries at first, you know, like little cars. They try on them, if you're all right on them, of course you go up to what they call the heavy division. Then you go out in convoy, to see what you like in convoy. He said, well, he said, now, he said, we're stuck between whether to put you in the tank corps or the artillery. I said, well, I said, it's up to you, so anyway. The plump for the tank corps, you know. And the regiment was the Westminster Dragoons, which was a flail regiment. It was part of the 79th Armoured Division, which was made up of what they call funnies, different specialised tanks doing different jobs. Some was minesweepers, some was waterproof tanks which would swim in the water for fetching supplies across, flamethrowers, but the flail tanks was more or less in the thick of it, because if the infantry were advancing and they come to a minefield, they would stop, call the tanks up, say we want to path clearing through this minefield so we can go through it. So you're actually then, you're in the front line. There's nothing between you and the Germans. Plus, your own gun is out of action when the chains are going round. You've got to turn that to the back, so it's facing backwards. So you're sitting duck. The regiment that called us up, if it was the Guard regiment, they'd throw a smoke screen down in front of our tanks, so the Germans couldn't see, you know. Plus their guns would protect us while we was doing this job. And then we'd stand to one side while they advanced till we was called upon again, another minefield, and do the same thing again. But unfortunately the Germans always coming up with fresh ideas, and there was what they call a non-impact mine. Our chains wouldn't explode it. So then they'd put a non-impact mine down, so we go over the top of it, and then they'd have a tripwire to one that would explode. As soon as the one we set off exploded, it automatically set off the other one underneath the tank and used to blow. You practice boarding, so everything has to reverse on these landing craft, so you come out forward. And I was at Tilbury. We'd been on and off these crafts, these tank crafts, no end of times. I'm getting a bit sick of it, you know. Anyway, we reversed on one day, and chained the tanks down. And said, there's some ladies want to see you over there. There was like the WWII, Women's Voluntary Service. And they got a massive tray, each one was all in a tray. And I tell you, it was that big, a piece of bread, half a loaf more or less, cut in half, with a big chunk of cheese in. Giving you one of them a piece, like, you know. She said, what's this for? She said, it's something to eat, you know, on your trip. I said, why were we going? She said, oh, I don't know. She said, we just told to give these sandwiches. And we get these sandwiches, and then they give us 3 carrier bags. Ordinary carrier bags. I said, what are these for? She said, you'll find out in a bit. Then we gets out, we backs out from Tilbury on this IST, and you can see all the other ships lining up, and they've all got barrage balloons, you know. And I mean, we'd done this before, practiced this before, but something told you there was something going on, you know, with these sandwiches and whatnot, and these carrier bags. Anyway, we joined this convoy, as far as you could see, as far as the eye could see, these ships. And it was the Americans, and he'd all used to come over on the microphone, now hear this, now hear this. We're setting off for so and so and going out to sea and all this. And we've been at sea about 2 or 3 hours, and this chat comes up. Now hear this, now hear this. You are entering hostile waters. Submarines are on patrol, you know. I thought, all right, we're off here. And then the sea, oh, it's terrible. It was very rough. And the barge, there was flat bottom chaps. They didn't used to go right the waves like that. It used to lift up and drop, bang, and everything, you could hear everything shuddering. We stuck this for about 2 days. And it had come over the chat that the D-Day was on the 5th of June. And they come over on the microphone that it had been postponed owing to bad weather. We was turning back for England. Oh, everybody was sick as dogs. I found out what the carrier bags were for, you know, we filled them in no time. And we said we're turning back, but everybody, oh no, let's keep going. Then we didn't anchor, but we were stationary, you couldn't hear the engines just riding it out. We'd done about another day on the sea. You could see it like an haze in the distance, and you could hear boom, 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 boom. The invasion actually had started before I got there, you know. We stood offshore for a bit, and the heavy guns on the shore, they're supposed to be knocked out. And they were still firing, you know, the massive chats there with them coastal guns. There was about 500 yards in between each ship. And this one next to us, over that way, a landing craft, got a direct hit. Well, you never seen anything in life. It disappeared in 5 minutes. Nobody, wasn't a soul left. It just disintegrated and boom, down. And then he said, you know, he said, you're in the war zone now, of course, as you know. landed on the beach, and there was one of our tanks, Westminster Dragoons, been knocked out, what they call a brew up. A German 88, it was been half a mile away, spotted it, and it had fired an 88 shell, gone straight through it. A tank alongside, it'd gone straight through that. And a half track, what they call an half track alongside that, gone through that. One shell had knocked 3 vehicles out and killed about 10 men. And the Yanks said to us, he said, come over the mic, he said, our job is to get you there. He said, your job is when you're on shore, to keep on shore. He said, we can't help you then. He said, but make sure, he said, we'll make sure you get ashore all right. Anyway, we took a run for the sands, and everything was waterproof. They thought they were going to land in deep water, but we was lucky. I landed in about 6 inches of water. Never even got my feet wet. But some of them launched about 300 yards out. Well, with it being rough, the waves lapping over the top. As soon as we went anywhere there was a hole, filled up straight away. It went down like a stone, the old tank. And the men in it as well. I think they lost more like that off the beach than the Germans actually killed, you know, because it was chaos more or less, because half of them didn't know what the RAF was doing. But the doors opened and down the ramp went. We was last, being the heavy tanks, we was last. First one were going off, and you could see them as soon as they got out the door, boom, you know, blow to hell like. And then as we got off, as it come out our turn, we got off. It was like, you know, like the seaside, you see all these houses. And every one was on fire more or less, you know, windows shattered and all this. But they were still in there, the jellies, there was firing, you know, shooting like it. You didn't know where the bloody hell you was going. And there was nobody could tell you, because we was all green, you know, even the commanders were green. They'd never been in action before, half of them. And they, well, but you didn't know where to go. Till this beachmaster said, get up over there. He said, there's room over there. There was only one way off the sands. They'd blown a hole in the sea wall, and that's where they was all going, up there. And there was a road leading out, straight as a die it was, and went up, straight up like that. Got halfway up this road, and it was like the M6, chock-a-block. Couldn't go nowhere. As we stopped, another one come up behind us, so we couldn't reverse. You couldn't go sideways because there was a minefield that side and there was a minefield that side. So we stuck. We stopped there all that day, never moved an inch. Well, that night, there's only about half a dozen German planes come over. The RAF ruled the air, it's a good job they did. These half a dozen planes come over at night, and they created havoc. Because the beach was that crowded, they couldn't miss. Well, we'd sat there and took it. I was sick of the pig. I thought, surely we can never go back, you know, we're not getting nothing done here. And I got hold of this gun on top of the tank. I see one of these German aircraft, it was on fire. The engine was on fire, it'd been hit. So my mate in the other tank says, what are you going to do? I said, I'm going to give him a load dose of what he's been giving us. Open fire. This gun. As soon as you pull the trigger, it used to go. There was 3 British beaches actually. There was Swords, Juno and Gold. Sword and Gold was British, and the Juno was a Canadian. But the idea, there was all separate beaches when we first landed, and the idea was to link the beaches up as quickly as possible, so you got one massive front like kind of thing. Juno and Sword linked up pretty good. The airborne was on our flanks, what they call the flanks, and we linked up with them pretty quick. We joined up with them pretty quick, Sword Beach did. And then we joined up with the Canadians on Juno. But Gold was isolated for a bit, Gold Beach. And the Yanks on their beaches, which was Utah and Omaha, they was having a rough time. Half of them had landed in the wrong spots and they'd come ashore in the wrong place. But the British beaches actually wasn't too bad. Not that particular crew, I was with them all the year, all the time, right to Germany. So that's Corporal Davis, tank commander. That one is Ken Tomlinson, the driver. That is Jim Ryan, myself, of course, co-driver. Bill Kershaw, the wireless operator. And the one taking the photo, is not on it, of course, is the gunner, Tyler, a lad called Tyler. Two drivers, as I say, driver and co-driver. The co-driver, which I took part in a lot of times, was actually a spare man, what we call a spare man. He was all supposed to be able to do one another's job, except the commander, because he was an officer. You couldn't do his job. Well, you could do it at a pinch, I suppose. But if the gunner was killed, he'd have to hop out, lift his body out, gain his place and carry on firing the gun. Same as the driver. If the driver was killed, lift him out, he would take over. And the wireless operator was the same. Everybody was supposed to do a different job. That's why it was called a tank crew. You were dependent on one another, you know. One of our tanks was on shore, Westminster Dragoons tank. This tank actually had been hit, but the crew had gone when we got there. They'd been either taken back to the casualty. I think one or two were injured. The one kid died of his wounds, Woodhouse his name was. I knew him from basic training. He was a driver and he died of his wounds, seriously wounded he was. But there was a lot of infantry lying about dead, you know. You couldn't really, you wasn't allowed to touch him because the burial party was coming behind and the what's the name there. Well, the only thing you could do, I mean, if they was in the front of the tank naturally, you'd pull them out of the way, you wouldn't run over them, even though they was dead. But apart from that, you weren't allowed to touch the dead bodies. And the Germans, I mean, the main thing was a watch. If you seen a watch on a dead German, you'd naturally go for it. But the officer said, don't touch them. I said, why not? He said, because the booby trap. You should booby trap the bodies. If you took the watch off, they'd explode, blow up in your face. So that was another thing we learned, never to touch a dead German. But when we went across back to Normandy, and you go in the graveyards, even today, there's rows and rows of crosses, and everyone is so much apart, 2 foot, 3 foot apart, till you come to one, and there's a cluster of 5. That's a tank crew. They're always buried together, a tank crew. You can never mistake them, they're all in a little cluster together. you see them on the pictures. Oh, I've been hit. You don't. It's not like that. Once you're hit, you're down like a sack of spuds. You're more or less dead as soon as the bullet hits you, and you just drop like a stone. And coming ashore, of course, there was, especially the infantry, they was copping it right, left, and centre. We wasn't so bad in the tanks. Machine guns couldn't penetrate the tanks. It was the big guns that upset the tanks. The 88s and the long range coastal guns up here. As soon as they got the range on you, your name was Dennis, more or less. Well, there was pillboxes all along here, what they call pillboxes. It was like brick buildings with a slit in. You probably see some if you go farther up. The slit in the side where they used to put a machine gun through and rake the beach. And more or less they was all right from small arms fire, you see, they could stop in there. But as soon as the big guns of our ships opened up and found these pillboxes, they'd just blow them apart, and that was the end of them. But our Navy ships, the big warships, were anchored out there, about 5 miles I think it was, I said. And their shells, when they used to come over, just like an express train coming out. You've heard of an express train going that's how the shells used to come. And there was firing all day long and most of the night. And they was giving support. They give a good support, the Navy did, I'll give them that. The big guns on them cats, they did more damage to the German defences than any of us could do with ours. Of course the RAF as well come over bombing. The first night we got ashore, I can remember the RAF come over, 1,000 bomber raid on bomb Le Havre, which is over there, and we could feel the blast from the bombs over here. So I can imagine what it was like in Le Havre at that time. This whole earth shook just here, the sands and everything just shook with the weight of the bombs that was dropping. I spent the 21st birthday just outside of Caen, waiting to go into Caen. And what the General Montgomery issued an order of the day that this Caen, it was a thorn in his side actually. He'd tried to take it that many times and been repelled. He gave an order out that Caen had got to be taken at all costs. So we'd been briefed the day before. We knew it was coming off. The first thing, they're going to have 1,000 bomber raid to soften them up. He said that's going to be followed by 1,000 gun barrage. You go to London and listen to the what's name on Armistice Day. One cannon going off. You can imagine what 1,000 cannons like. Not going off one at a time, going off all together. 1,000 gun barrage for half an hour. He said then we're going to have a creeping barrage, which is they're going to fire over the top of you, land in front of your tank, and then they're going to elevate so many degrees and fire again. You've got to put your tank in bottom gear and creep up. That was to keep the Germans' heads down. Anyway, we're getting near the edge of Caen now, and this creeping barrage is still going on. All of a sudden it stops. It comes over, right, go. Well, put it in second gear, third gear, and you're off. And then when we get into the outskirts of Caen, it's just rubble. Well, you imagine 1,000 bombers and 1,000 gun barrage, there's nothing left of it. It's rubble. You're going over the top of this rubble, and you can't see, all you can see is the tank going up and down like that. And where are we going? The commander says, keep going straight, you're all right. He says, I think we've done it this time, I think we're going in this time. Anyway, all of a sudden there was such a bloody bang. The Germans had opened up, but they were still in the ruins, still got guns in the ruins firing, you know. Anyway, it fell that day for Caen, did the city of Caen. I went back there on that 50th anniversary, went back to the city. You wouldn't, it's a modern city, you know. Now you're trying to look like, well, it wasn't like this when I was here, it was just a mass of rubble, you know. But they've actually rebuilt the whole city, you know. It's a beautiful city. But they reckon there's a plaque in the middle to the British Army in memory of all those that gave their lives, you know, for the liberation of this Caen. But there are a hell of a lot of casualties in the town itself. Like civilians, a lot of them had scattered, you know, gone because they knew what was going to happen. But a lot of them had stayed, and of course they perished in the ruins. There was no front line, you know. You say, well, the Germans are there, we're here. There was everywhere. The main force has been cut. We've been split up from the main force. He said, try and hold your ground until they can try and join up again with us, you know. Well, we were in a field. Well, the Germans had flooded, they opened the dikes and had flooded all the fields. And it was like a bog. It was in this field, and the infantry were in front of us. We was following the infantry up in case they come into a minefield. Anyway, it's half split into a ditch. Well, as it gradually went over, this one track was in the air, wasn't doing nothing. So we knew it was stuck. And it was near enough on its side, the tank was. Well, all you could do then, what they call the ARV, Armoured Recovery Vehicles, the officer used to get on the phone, send the ARV up, one of the tanks is out of action here, he's bogged down. Right. It's getting dark now. So the officer comes up, he said, bad news for you lads. What's up? He said, the infantry is withdrawing to the back here. He said, they're only going to the next field. He said, but you'll be on your own. He said, now, if it comes to the worst, he said, destroy everything you can, blow the tank up. He said, but if you think you can stick it out, he says, you know, stick it out. So pull all the turrets down and that, and we're waiting. And there's what they call moonbeam lights, searchlights. Switch these searchlights on, and it's like being in a ghost town. The mist is rising off the fields and that. You're in no man's land in this tank. and the Germans, they got what they call a sticky grenade. They stick it on the side of the tank, just do that, and they used to run like hell, and then this tank, this grenade used to blow up. Didn't always effective, it used to perhaps blow a hole in the tank sometimes, but it wasn't effective, what they call a brew up, destroying the tank. I forget who was on guard that particular night. Anyway, he was on guard on the turret. And everybody's nerves were on edge, of course. He was in no man's land. And the firing was going on, the shelling was going on all the time. And the infantry was behind us. Well, we heard about these Germans with these sticky grenades anyway. He said, what's that? You could hear like a scratching. I said, it's a bloody German. He said, he's trying to put a grenade on the tank. Anyway, he pokes it over the chap with his gun. Whoever on guard. Rattles a few rounds off, and it was a cow. Moo. I don't think he hit it, but you know your nerves with that jangle. And I fancy meeting a cow out in the middle of nowhere, Tom. When the Germans broke through the American lines in the Ardennes, I was in the pictures, me and my mates, 2 girls, and watching this film and think all troops report back to their units. And then we got to the pictures. The front was 60 miles away, so we was well and truly, we was just enjoying ourselves. When we come out of the pictures, you could see the flashes from the guns, the German guns. That's how fast they'd come. Of course, the girls got panicky. They thought the Germans were coming back. You no leave me, Jimmy. You no leave me. Oh, of course, we had to do. You know, go back to the unit. And the commanding officer said to us, "We're sending so many up. We picked names out of the hat. Unfortunately, your name's one of them. We're sending you up to try and stop the Germans coming through the Ardennes, as it was in them days." And there was about 2 dozen of us went up, 2 or 3 tanks, officers of course, and we get to the Reichswald forest, and the commanding officer said, "Gather round lads, I'll give you the picture of what's happening." Oh, on the way there, all the Americans are coming back. So our officer says to one of them, he said, "Hey," he said, "we've come to help you." So this American said to our officer, "You go where you want to go." He said, "We're going that way." So we had to go up, and we went past them, and they had stopped them actually before we got there. But when we got in the Reichswald forest, our officer said, "Gather round lads and I'll give you the gist of what's happening. And as he was stood there, they opened up with mortars, the Germans. They used to fire about 12 at a time. The first one landed about 100 yards away. We all dived under. I dived under the tank. I don't know how I made it. I dived under the tank. And the officer wasn't quick enough. The second one blew him to pieces. And of course, it peppered all the area. And as I was under the tank, sheltering by the wheels, you could hear the shrapnel hitting the side of the tank. I expected one to come through any minute, hit me in the legs or something, you know. But unfortunately, I got away with it. So it must have been my lucky day, but the officer, as I say, it blew into pieces. And we never did find out what the plan was. The worst part of my experience, I mean, I've seen men blown to pieces, which everybody did. But when we went into Belsen, I've never seen nothing like it in my life. I mean, a lot of people said it didn't damn, it didn't damn. I was there and I seen what happens. And the smell, you know. One come up to me, he was a walking skeleton, and he frightened the life out of me. And I was only a young lad, I mean 20. But all he was trying to do was grab my hand and say thank you, you know, for rescuing us. But, oh, it was horrible, it was terrible. It's something that live in your, well, it's live in my memory as long as I live, I think. I finished up in the Canadian hospital, actually, in Germany. I was on the Canadian sector. And they had surgeons, top fellas in the job, come to look at me, and they didn't know what was wrong at first. They thought I'd been poisoned at Belsen with all the disease and that. He said he's caught a bug. He says, and, he's in a bad way. He said, I think our best bet is to send him home. He says, well, we'll probably do better when we get him home. And it wasn't until I got back to England that I found out it was ulcers I'd got. They reckon it's worry, don't they? Stress and worry in the first place that brings them on. I think it was Belsen actually that faced it on in the first place. I was all right up to that, to going into Belsen. And I reckon it was seeing that, plus the stench and everything, you know, and it just got the better of you, more or less. I went through the Blitz in this country, and what's the name, I've seen some bad things in the Blitz. I mean, the bomb Birmingham, they bombed it every night, more or less. But you actually, they never got here, the Germans never got here. I mean, if they'd got to England, it'd probably have been a lot seriouser than it was in our respect in this country. But the people over there have really suffered, you know, Dutch, Belgians, the French, under German rule. I mean, they knew what it was like, we didn't, because we'd never been occupied. I look back, I think, I'm glad I was there, but I wouldn't like to go through it again. You know, I'm pleased now that I did go and I did my part. But if you said to me, there's £1,000 going to do it again, no way would I go again, no. Once bitten, twice shy.